there's always room to keep working on your logo and everything about your brand, really. I think it should always be ongoing. Even your business plan, I think it should be something that you're always kind of checking in on monthly and tweaking things as you go.
I'm Becca with the Happy Ever Crafter, and in this episode I'm talking to Jaana Brett, who is a hand letterer and graphic designer who specializes in branding and logo design. So today she's walking us through some tips and tricks on what to know and how to go about creating your own hand lettered logo, which is sort of an overwhelming topic. And I get into everything that happened with my own logo in this episode and how it has evolved and how you could run into some of the same issues and overcome them in your own business. So let's jump right in. Jaana, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
I feel like we have to start this by explaining how we know each other, because a lot of guests I have on this show I don't actually know in person, but you I do know in person. But it didn't start that way.
That's
We
right.
started as like sort of online friends. And actually, do you remember how we met?
Yeah, you emailed me randomly because you bought one of my greeting cards at a shop in Perth.
Yeah, so
And looking back, it was the worst card design ever. Like, it was probably one of the first times I ever tried lettering and thought I could sell them.
yeah, for people listening, Jaana lives in a very small town just outside of Ottawa, and my mom lives there too. And so I was visiting my mom and we were walking in the like downtown of Perth, which is very small. And there was a store that sold handmade stuff, and I saw Jaana's card and I recognized hand lettering on it, and I had just started doing hand lettering. I was like in the phase where I was obsessed with anything that had hand lettering on it. So I turned it over and I found your email address and I just sent you an email, and we've been friends ever since. It's like
It's
a
true.
match made in heaven.
And now I feel like I'm kind of friends with your mom too, because she's pretty awesome and I run into her everywhere.
That's the definition of a small town.
Yeah.
Anyway, okay, so at the time I just pictured that you were a greeting card designer, but there's obviously a lot more to that. So can you talk to us about who you are, what you do, all those kinds of things before we get into the meat of this?
All right. Well, I was born and raised here in Perth, but after college I moved to Toronto and I was there for about 12 years with my husband, and then we had a daughter and realized it's hard to live in more than a 400 square foot condo with a child, and thought it's time to move back home. But during that time, I was a graphic designer. That's what I went to school for. And I always kind of specialized in typography design. So naturally, when the hand lettering movement kind of became cool again, I thought, well, this is totally up my alley. Like, I'll be awesome at this. And so I spent all the money on the expensive things. And I feel like you probably tell everyone in all of your workshops this, that just because you own the expensive stuff doesn't make you good automatically. So there was a good year that I tried and failed miserably, because I just winged it. I didn't really learn the proper way to start. And I kind of gave up lettering for a while. And then when I finally learned how to do it properly, starting with a pencil, that's when I kind of got into it as a side business that kind of complemented my graphic design business. And I've transitioned into full-time, this is my business, doing logos for people and helping them with their branding. And now I use a lot of my lettering in their branding. So
yeah, so I was gonna say it was like a cool way to combine all of your skills, like the graphic design plus the hand lettering and like the branding knowledge, which is what we're gonna talk about today. I have started to notice a trend in like a lot of my audience that people are like you have learned hand lettering or calligraphy and are starting to decide that they want to do it as a business. And I think that it's a good time to talk about branding and logos and all of that kind of stuff. So you were the first person to pop into my mind because you like you just explained, have all of that experience and all of those things. So I think the smart place to start is, and I can talk about like my experience with all of this because it wasn't that long ago that I put all of my own stuff together, but I think the smartest place to start is talking about like what is branding. And maybe some people are like, well, I know what branding is. It's like your logo, but that's not really all that goes into it. And I think that those two things sort of get confused. So can you walk us through like what's the difference and all of that stuff?
Yeah, well, so the logo is definitely the most fun part of your brand, but branding as a whole is pretty much everything about what you do, from the way you talk to people on the phone, from the way you compose emails to clients or customers. It's your packaging, it's your social media, it's things people say about you when you're not in the room. So everything. So
Like how dad jokes are part of my brand.
exactly. That's exactly part of your brand. So if someone saw one of your posts and all they read was your caption and didn't see any kind of visual with it, they would know who was talking by the way you talk and use hashtags and everything.
All of those things, and you just gave us like a 10-second overview of what branding is. But I feel like because it encompasses so many things, that could be like a really long
Yes,
explanation. And you do teach these things, like you
I do.
also didn't mention that when you were talking about who you are and what you do, but like you teach workshops and you teach branding and all of this. And so I know that you have like a freebie that I'll be able to give people, and I'll link to it down below, that's going to be helpful and goes into more depth about what branding is and all the things you need to think about. But I really want to talk specifically about logos because, like you said, it's the most fun part. And especially when people are first getting started, and I experience this, it's like the part that you want to create first because then you feel like official, right?
Yeah.
And I also think that it's really overwhelming when you're getting started because you have this pressure to think like my logo has to be perfect because it's the way that I'm announcing that I'm in business, and everyone's going to have my business card with my logo on it and all this stuff. And there's just all this pressure. So what advice would you have for people who want to create a logo but feel that pressure that it has to be perfect if they're going to do it at all?
Well, I think you still need to start where you are and use what you have. I think everyone kind of starts that way, especially when you're a small business owner and you don't automatically have the funds to really invest in hiring like an agency or designer to do all that for you right from the beginning. So I don't want to tell people there's a right or wrong way because there isn't really. And I think as you get started, if you start with something simple, you evolve naturally and realize maybe what you started with wasn't quite what you had envisioned for your business. So there's always room to keep working on your logo and everything about your brand, really. I think it should always be ongoing. Even your business plan, I think it should be something that you're always kind of checking in on monthly and tweaking things as you go. So yeah, start where you are with what you have.
I was hoping you were going to say that because I mean, I could tell my story with it. And I tried to find one of my old business cards and I couldn't find it. But what I did find was one of my workbooks that has my old logo on it. And this
I
was
have one of those workbooks.
so this was my original logo and it was on everything. And looking at it now, it's funny because my new one is quite a bit more refined.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I remember specifically when I was starting and I just knew I needed a logo. It was like one of those, like I said, one of those things that would like make me feel official to have business cards like I am officially in business. But I remember thinking to myself, if I wait until I have a perfect idea for it, or if I wait until I know how to make a logo, I'm never going to do it. And that's just my philosophy always with everything. I'm a very much like a done is better than perfect person. And so I seriously remember sitting down and writing out the words happy ever. And that was my first try. That was the first attempt I made at writing those words. And I was like,
that's awesome.
Yeah, that'll do. That'll be totally fine. And I like just didn't overthink it at all. And looking at it now, I laugh. But at the time, like it served its purpose. That was my logo for a good like 2 years. And it's not like anyone ever stopped me and was like, this logo is not very good. Nobody cares. It was on a business card with the color that I wanted to use moving forward, and people recognized it, and it worked, right? So I don't know. I'm glad that you said to just start where you are and just do it. Because then a couple years later, I ended up having enough money to hire somebody to make me a better one. And the other thing that you said was that it can always be evolving, and you are always going to be tweaking it. And I think that that's especially true for people who want to incorporate their hand lettering in it. Because
for sure.
This is not my style anymore. That was my style at the time. This is more my style now, but who knows if that'll be my style next year. And so especially if you're incorporating your hand lettering into it, which we're about to talk about, like, you can't be expecting that it's going to last you forever.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, well, the whole point of this is that I want to be able to help people get off the ground with their own logo. And because we're talking to hand letterers and calligraphers, I think that the appropriate thing to talk about is just like, what are things that people who want to make their own logo incorporating their hand lettering need to know, like do's and don'ts, like guidelines for them to think about, just like general logo rules. I'm like clearly not a logo designer, so I'm going to let you take that away.
Okay, so this part would be the brand identity component of your brand. The best kind of logo, I'd say, is one that has options, legibility, and packaging collateral. So I'll kind of go through those three things. But when I say options, there's three different kinds of logos. There's graphic logos, which would be logos like Nike. We know it just as a graphic. They hardly ever use the font. Or the M in McDonald's. Then there's word marks, which are just font based. So probably a lot of your followers would have a word mark, like you have a word mark. So other ones would be like Coca-Cola or Google. They're just word mark logos. And then you have letter mark logos, which are like IBM, UPS. You're just using letters as your logo. Now, oftentimes there's a combination of those. For me, I sometimes use a graphic with my word mark, and sometimes I just use my word mark. And then I also have a tagline that I sometimes use and I sometimes don't. But when you're developing all of this, if you have all those three components, which we're going to have a cool pop-up that shows you what we're talking about right now. If you can pull those apart, that's going to give you a toolkit that will make working on other parts of your business easier. Have you ever seen like a great logo, but then someone puts it on their social media bio and it's like awkwardly crammed in that circle and you think, oh, because they didn't have an option for their logo to still have that brand consistency, but work in a circle. So if you can develop that like full logo and then start pulling it apart to say, how is this going to look as a horizontal presentation footer or as an email signature, or how's it going to look if I make it into a sticker? So there's kind of all these variables and considerations that it's just going to make it easier for you to do your day-to-day stuff because you'll just have all these options to work with.
So I have, just while you were saying that, I was pulling up the different versions of my logo so that we can show them because I have examples of that. So this is the one that I have all over everything.
Yes.
And that's like, I would use that standard. But like what you were saying, if I wanted it as my like Instagram profile picture, that would be tiny and you wouldn't be able to read it. So then I have this one.
Okay.
That's like it when, and I admittedly haven't used it in that many places just because I usually just put a picture of my face if I need like an avatar sort of thing. But when I was working with the designer, we wanted this as another option. So it's like supposed to be kind of the shape of a nib and it has the H of the Happy Ever Crafter in it. And then the last one that we made together was this one that incorporates all of them.
Awesome.
So yeah, so like I feel like that's a pretty standard example of what you would get if you worked with a graphic designer on logos. You get different variations like that, right?
Yeah. I mean, you could definitely attempt to do this yourself. I don't usually tell people this.
You don't want to say it because you're like, no, you'll look for it.
But because I know your followers are already creatively inclined, then I don't see, I mean, you're going to be using your own work. I'm assuming if you're using your own hand lettering, then you're going to want to try and figure it out on your own. So, and there I said it, you don't have to hire a designer, but at the same time, if you find yourself like struggling with the software to make it work for you, then there's also no harm in going to a designer to say, hey, I have this name that I drew by hand and I need it to be a logo. What can you do for me? It's not like a designer will say like, no, I'm only going to use my own work.
Well, I also, I think that a lot of people who have never made a logo before, who are just trying to make their own, and I can say this because I did it, aren't aware that where you're going to want to put your logo and like the format of how you save the logo and how you build the logo is going to really matter. So for example, that first logo that I made a long time ago, I think I had just saved it as like a JPEG, like crappy format, whatever. And then every time I went to go put it on my website, it was like pixelated and I had to resize it and all that stuff, which doesn't happen anymore because now I have all the proper formats from my designer. And so like, if you don't know those things, you probably shouldn't do it yourself.
Right.
But that's why I have you here, because I want you to tell people like, what are those kinds of like specs that they should know to do, or that they should be incorporating if they wanted to make one with their own hand lettering.
Well, a good rule of thumb is if you can resize it down to like a 1 squared inch, if it still is legible and looks good, then you're okay. But if you scale it down and your tagline is like totally legible, then you need to be tweaking things. Usually recommend not using photographs in logos. That's a trend that you don't see very often anymore, but I always feel like I need to mention it because there are still some people that want to include like a photograph component in their logo, and it just never really works out well too. You want it to be clean and simple, and especially if you are running a creative business where you're likely going to be maybe putting this logo as a watermark on other work of yours. You don't want it to deter from what work you're presenting. Vibrating colors. If you're picking colors, have you heard of vibrating color? No. So that's when you've picked two colors that you're using together, but when you see them side by side, the edges look fuzzy because our eye is trying to see two colors that are the same tone, and there's not enough contrast. So it looks fuzzy even though it isn't. So just working on figuring out the right color combinations to use. I always recommend including or picking a neutral color as part of your brand kind of toolkit, so that if someone, say you were hosting an event and you wanted me to sponsor it, and you did some cool big photograph and as your background of the poster for the event, and you had a bunch of logos on the bottom, everyone's probably seen this, where you've seen some kind of event poster with all these logos jammed on the bottom, but if everyone sends their full color, like full logo, and it's on some busy background, like your logo's probably going to get lost. So if you always have like a go-to white, black, and maybe a gray or beige, depending on what the rest of your brand colors look like, then you're always going to have that one option to go to if someone ever says like, hey, can you send me your logo? I'm going to use it on something. And at least, because you don't really have any control in those situations, it's going to at least turn out somewhat okay if they're using a neutral version of your logo.
I can say that doing these interviews with everybody, I always ask for everybody's logo, because at the beginning of the video, and if anybody wants to see this in action, just rewind and you'll be able to see Jaana's. At the beginning of the video, there's like up on this episode, and it has your logo, my logo, and then us talking for a second. And I always have a white stamp of the person's logo there. And I've had instances where I'm working with somebody who maybe is not doing this for a living and maybe hasn't even established a very strong brand, but I had them on for a different reason or something. And I asked for their logo, and it'll be like a crappy quality JPEG with a million colors. I end up having to essentially build them a logo just so I can put it into the video. Right. So I can definitely attest to the fact that it's helpful to have the right formats and the right colors and stuff like that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. And so if people are doing their own hand lettered logo, and they've picked their colors and they're working on different like variations of layouts, it's also, I usually like to recommend, even if you're just going with a word mark like what you have, to also have some sub fonts that are kind of your go-to, because I'm assuming no one hand letters their invoices completely, right? Like, or if you're making any kind of other brand collateral, like a brochure or business card, like you're not doing that all by hand. So it's always nice to have kind of that go-to list of fonts that you're always going to use and that complement your logo.
Yeah. So for example, this is my, it won't focus. You can't even see it. Come on, come on, come on. I'm just making it worse. Okay, here we go. This is my hand lettering.
Yes.
But this and this are the same font, and they're also the same font that's on my website.
Amazing.
That's what you're talking about, right?
And then what do you use for like body copy?
I would use the same. Well, I have like a
like a lighter version of that font.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
But it definitely makes a big difference, and it's just like tiny little things like that make your brand like recognized.
Yeah.
If you use them consistently.
Absolutely.
Okay, so lots of good tips in there so far, but I am kicking myself right now for not asking a very specific question that I know that people listening are going to want to know. What software should they be using? And maybe more importantly, or equally as important, what would be the easiest way to digitize the hand lettering to become part of a logo?
Okay. So obviously this is when a graphic designer comes in handy. The software is expensive. But yes, absolutely. Photoshop and Illustrator would be your go-to for creating a vectorized version of your logo.
Actually,
now,
can you talk about what vectorized even means?
Yeah, I was just going to say that. I guess people want to know. So a raster image is something that's made up of pixels. So a photograph or a JPEG or PNG, any kind of like one layered picture file is a raster file. And then a vector file is something that you can tweak very specifically with software like Illustrator. So you can't do that in Photoshop. I know a lot of people think they can try and do everything in Photoshop, but it really is for editing photos. So to create a vector image, you would use Illustrator. Now, Adobe has come out with these really awesome free apps. I don't know if you've used them before. There's Adobe Capture and Adobe Draw, and they're free, which they do have paid like options for them. Oh, and Photoshop and Illustrator do have free trials. So if it's something you do want to play with, they are really awesome. And there's so many tutorials out there now that you can do this. But so these apps, Adobe Capture, you literally download it on, I have an iPhone. I think it works for Android too, but on my iPhone, you literally take a picture of like anything. You can take a picture of your hand and it automatically makes it like a vector graphic immediately. I mean, there's some tweaking tools within it, and then you save it and you have this vector image, which like I think back on, I graduated design school almost 15 years ago now, and like that was not a thing. You literally had to create images point by point, and now you can just take a picture and it does all the work for you. So that would have been really awesome in school.
Yeah, I didn't know that existed. I've just been on Illustrator, and if you've done it before, it's not actually that.
No, it's
but
yes.
It involves the software. So if you don't need the software, amazing.
So as soon as you take it, your Adobe Capture image, then you can open it in their other free app, Adobe Draw, and then you can play with the color, take out the background, and then you have your vector image. I think you have a tutorial on how to vectorize in Illustrator.
Yeah, it's really old. There are probably pieces of it but like the essential steps are the same.
Yeah.
And it's on my list to make a new one anyway. So if anybody's watching this, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. I'll put it out eventually.
So yeah, Adobe Capture is probably the new easy way to make your own vector. And then I would say doing anything outside of those two apps might be a little challenging if you didn't have more software, but it's definitely doable. And then just import it into Canva if you have all your branded templates set up there. If you have the paid account in Canva, you can upload your specific brand fonts if they're not already part of Canva. So that's a tool I always recommend to people who don't have software like Illustrator to create their own business cards or anything like that.
Let's say you were about to sit down and create a logo for yourself. Give me the like bird's eye view steps that you would do right now if you were going to sit down and make a really quick logo.
Depending on how messy your kind of brainstorming page looks, I would either go over that with a marker to make it a little darker, because then it kind of cuts down the process of how Adobe Capture works. And I feel like they should pay me for all the times I've just said Adobe. Or tracing paper, go over it and refine it and then take a picture of that. But if you play with this app, you'll see how smooth you can actually get an image to come out, which is pretty cool.
Okay. And then you've got it in Adobe Capture.
Adobe Capture, clean it up in Adobe Draw, get rid of the background, swap out colors. And then I would bring it into Illustrator so that I could play around with it. And then that would make it easier for you to kind of see on one artboard the full logo version you came up with. So start adding fonts to it if you're doing the tagline. Just focus on that full brand logo. And then once you've kind of got a logo that you love, or at least will work for now, then look at the list that I've provided in that logo playbook, and you'll see all the options that you can create. So a horizontal version, a version that doesn't have your tagline, a version that's maybe, if you do have a graphic component, that it's just that, a version you can use in social media. Just kind of go through all the variations and just duplicate your logo and tweak it.
I love it. I mean, those steps make it sound simple, but I think that if we just go back to what we said at the beginning about like done is better than perfect, I think just knowing the things that you mentioned today is even more than a lot of people realize. Like knowing that it should be like, you should be able to scale it by having it vectorized. You should be able to like show it with a transparent background to people. You should be able to use different formats of it in different spots and not have colors vibrating. I didn't know that. Really, like, I think knowing those steps and knowing that it doesn't have to be perfect the first time and just giving yourself permission to like have one before it's perfect is going to be encouraging for people in general.
I hope there's no graphic designers watching this.
The thing is, sure there will be.
But it's because I also my biggest clientele is probably other small businesses, and I'm a huge supporter of small businesses. And I love to give options about how to like help yourself too, because sometimes that's real life.
I mean, realistically, I probably would never want to counsel the average person to do their own wedding calligraphy. It's the same thing. But if the person cannot afford or is starting out, of course I'm going to give you my tips. So, I mean, I know how you feel, but I appreciate having you on here, and I'm sure everyone else will appreciate it too, because they were going to DIY it anyway. So at least now they're better prepared. I love it. Well, thank you so much, Jaana, for coming on. Can you tell us where, well, first of all, I'm going to link down to your awesome freebie below so people can grab that, but where else can people find you?
So you can find me at paperstudio.com, and that's paper with 2 A's. And I realize that's a super generic name, but because my name has 2 A's in it, I thought it was super clever at the time.
Branding.
There you go. So, and now people totally recognize it. They're like, oh, 2 A's, I get it. I'm like, good. There was a long time where I had to explain that to a lot of people.
No, it never needed explain. You don't need to
Yeah.
explain plays on words to me. I got it right away.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why I messaged you. I didn't actually like your hand lettering. I just liked your brand puns.
Well, there's still a lot of people that say like, you spelt paper wrong. Like, I know.
Anyway, okay, cool. Well, thank you again for coming on, and maybe I'll see you in real life soon.
Yeah, that would be really great. Someday.
After this whole quarantine thing.
Yep.